Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Whale Nerds podcast. This is episode number 113. My name is Slater, and I'm here with Adam and Caitlin.
What's up?
Hello, and we have a special guest this week. We are joined by Dave Cade. He's currently a postdoc at Hopkins Marine Station. He actually started out as an educator in the outdoors, but also teaching math before returning to science to pursue his passions. He has a master's degree in education from Stanford University, but then also has a master's degree in oceanography from Oregon State University. Go Beavs. And his PhD is from Stanford as well, at Hopkins Marine Station. He was in the Goldbogen lab. He has done postdoctoral work at UC Santa Cruz in the biotelemetry and behavioral ecology lab. And he has also done he's currently postdocing at Hopkins again. Dave's a whale tag extraordinaire, like studies all kinds of cool predators in the ocean. And we're super excited to talk to you today. So thanks for being on, Dave.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And if you want to add anything about your background, feel free. That was just the highlight reel.
I also like long walks on the beach. And
there we go. Perfect. You like whales?
Every day. every time I learn something more, I get more excited about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Us too. So your like early career was more in the education field. So if you could touch on a little bit about like what was your teaching background and then how you sort of came back to marine science. I think you have an interesting path compared to some people.
Yeah, I worked in the outdoors for a while, and then doing outdoor education kinds of things and wilderness therapy programs, and then I was right after college. I did that. And then I taught high school. I taught high school math in San Francisco and then in Redwood City, California. And loved it. But I was always looking for something to just keep expanding my skill set, do something different. And when I switched careers, I was looking back into science. And the first thing I did was a program that was based out of the University of Washington called Beam Reach. And it was a killer whale acoustics program. And we would go up there and I did a course essentially. It was like spent my teacher savings, my big teacher dollars on a course up there in Friday Harbor Laboratory, where we did 5 weeks on a sailboat doing field research with killer whales, and 5 weeks on land, like doing analysis and data processing and research. And it was kind of my first introduction to really like kind of hardcore research science, like dedicated research program. And I loved it for all of the reasons. I loved it because we're out on a sailboat, like working with killer whales and seeing animals and doing passive acoustic recordings. And I loved it because the quantitative aspect was exactly what I was teaching. I was teaching pre-calculus, and I was doing a lot of trigonometry and conic sections and parabolas and things. And when I was studying acoustics, it was just a merger of all these things. Like to study killer whales, to study acoustics, it's a lot of trigonometry. Like describing sound waves is a trigonometric function, and so you're using these trigonometric ideas. And then to do things like localize where a killer whale vocalization comes from, or any vocalization, any sound in the ocean. Imagine if you have like 4 different hydrophones, right? A hydrophone is an acoustic recorder recording sound. So you have 4 different locations, and the sound from an animal is going to arrive at those 4 locations at slightly different times because the speed of sound actually takes some time to arrive. And so to describe where that killer whale sound actually comes from, it's like this series of intersecting hyperbolas between all these hydrophones, and that's how you can find where that killer whale localizes. And so I had this like immediate connection to all the work I was doing with my kids, and I could go back later and like talk to my old students and be like, yeah, this is exactly all these things I taught you. I'm like using kind of in my everyday life now. So it's been fun for me to go back and do those things. So I like both the quantitative aspect and the field research and being outside and working on boats and those kind of things too. So it's a really good career for me.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Seems like the most fun way to use math.
Yeah, I wish a teacher would have told me that.
Yeah,
I would have been less scared about math in college if like they would have been like, well, this is what you use it for, sound waves of killer whales. I've been like, oh, I'm in. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hyperboles are about as far as my college education got. The second I hit those, I was like, I can't do this anymore.
It's all relevant.
Yeah, this is true. So what are you currently working on? I guess we'll kind of like fast forward to what you're doing now.
I'm going to go take a little side angle here. I'm actually working on sharks.
What?
Oh,
But giant filter feeding sharks. So I do a lot of work with my current postdoc is actually involving basking sharks. So I just
no
spent a month out
way.
in Ireland working with
cool.
basking shark populations out there, feeding animals.
Wow.
And there's a lot of parallels, of course, between how basking sharks utilize the ocean and filter feed, and how baleen whales filter feed in the ocean. So you're looking at a lot of the similarities between these two giant filter feeding animals. And there's a lot of parallel history for how they were exploited. Basking sharks were like a huge fishery for a long time, and off the Irish coast and everywhere. They have a lot of oil in their livers. They're really fatty, and so they were hunted to near extinction off the Irish coast. But they're coming back, and now you have big groups. One day I saw 100 basking sharks.
Whoa.
Wow. I saw one.
Yes. And there's the one in Monterey. You guys see the one in Monterey recently?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I
Nice.
had an insane encounter with it. It was amazing.
And we just had 3 in Santa Barbara too, not too long ago. So that's
wow.
super funny. Yeah, I guess we
Within
had
like a
4
month,
out of
right?
4 of us have seen basking sharks. That's the first for the podcast, I think.
Yeah.
At some point, nobody's seen one, or somebody hasn't seen one, so that's cool.
Yeah, I saw him on the East Coast.
Yeah.
In the North Atlantic. I wasn't out the day that it was sighted in Monterey, but super cool. So can you put a suction cup tag on a basking shark? Isn't their skin like hard to do that?
Yeah, they have some
the
denticles
dorsal.
that makes the suction cup tagging harder. And so we did a barbed tag, but then the tag was-
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. So are you to me, the Gold Bogan Lab's kind of famous for making their own tags in-house. Was that the same thing for the basking sharks, or has it kind of already been refined?
Interesting question. Yeah, well, it's good. We're getting like a reputation, although I don't know. We don't actually do a lot in Gold Bogan Lab of making tags completely from scratch. We work with a company in Australia a lot called CATS, the Customized Animal Tracking Solutions. I tell people if you just Google CATS videos, I'm sure you'll find it. But they're a great company. They're the ones who actually kind of design. They're an Australian group, and they kind of integrate the sensors that we use with the video cameras that we use and the hydrophones, and have worked with us in a lot of different pieces. So we do a lot of kind of tag adjustment and design and make things work. There's always an element of tinkering, but we do kind of pre-order a lot of these things with another company. But for these basking shark tags, we had a lot of in-house tinkering to do to try to think about what the best attachment method is and how to get the tags back and how to kind of connect a bunch of different pieces. We're trying to get a speed sensor on there and a CATS tag with a video camera and different accelerometer on the body versus an accelerometer up on that can measure where the floating tag is. And so there's a whole different system. And so we have done a lot of built off all my whale work to really get into this expertise. And we worked with some cool researchers in Dublin. Nick Payne's lab up there with Haley Dalton was our big tagger there. She did an awesome job. And then Taylor Chappell at Oregon State, his group, and Alex McIntosh, who worked a lot with sharks. So it's a new field for me. And it's one of the best things we do as scientists is get to collaborate with people from all over different areas and really kind of build our different skill sets, because it really is a situation where not one person can do everything. You need a lot of different people to be involved.
Yeah.
When did you start that project?
We just did the field work over the month of May and middle of April.
Okay.
I've been working on it, kind of getting stuff set up since the fall.
And so will you be going back to Ireland?
That's the idea, is kind of work on the data we got this year and then go back next spring.
So is that the best time of year to go there to work on basking sharks?
Well, for me, this is people always ask me like, "Well, how come there's whales in Hawaii? Why don't we go out and work in Hawaii?" Or my wife asked me that.
Right.
But the answer is because I study foraging. I study feeding mechanics, and so that's usually happens in cold places for whales and for basking sharks. And so in the spring is where the primarily feeding at the surface seems to happen in spring and kind of early summer for these sharks off the Irish coast. But they're there for a while. Like they'll often big aggregations in August, but they're social aggregations. And they'll do these big kind of shark tornadoes where they kind of swim in these, like you'll get 50 or 100 sharks kind of swimming in circles. And we think it must be some kind of mating and breeding behavior, but we haven't actually seen that actual behavior, but something, adjacent to some kind of social behavior.
Wow, that's super cool. Yeah, and on the east coast of the U.S., like they would see them in May and June, and then I think they'd keep going north up towards like Canada. So I was just curious.
Well, and with sharks too.
Same.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just curious if it's kind of the same.
Well, yeah, that's our understanding. But the other problem with sharks is that we only log them when they're at the surface.
Yeah.
And they don't have to surface. So there could be 100 sharks at 10 meters depth, and you just never see them. And so that's kind of one of the things we're trying to learn with tags is where do they spend their time when they're not available to watch? Versus whales are great because they have to breathe. So if there's a whale around, eventually it'll pop up.
Yeah.
True.
Is there
Might be a mile away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a main purpose for the research? Like, are you doing a population assessment or just kind of broad tag data or?
Yeah, well, this project, I mean, when we're doing collaborations, everyone's got a slightly different thing. One person was working on, Alex was working on social behavior. Other people are working on the biomechanics of motion and just what does a shark actually do and how does it maintain its kind of energy and energy use. My project specifically is part of a larger project looking at the filters and the biomechanics of the filters and how the filters actually work.
Cool.
So my role is to kind of look at how that animal moves when it's feeding versus when it's not feeding, and what does that say about the kind of the drag that's required and the drag from filtering.
And I'll tell you what, watching the basking shark feed here was amazing. It's just so cool watching it just cut through the water.
You see the gill rakes and all that stuff behind. It's so cool.
One thing I thought was really cool when I saw it here was it was going through anchovy schools at the same time. And so the anchovies were like lighting up and flying, like boiling out of the water. So that was pretty cool.
That's super cool. Yeah.
So when you did your PhD, you were doing whale tagging. Is that right? As some of your field work? Okay.
Yep.
I don't know if was it more than one project to do your PhD, or how did that work? I don't know if you want to just elaborate on some of the work that you did previously for Hopkins.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to my idea of my path, where I came to Hopkins now with an oceanography degree and an active acoustics background, meaning you could use acoustics to send a sound into the water, look at the ping, and look at the reflection of sound, and that can tell you something about what's in the water. Specifically, it can tell you the density and distribution of prey, of krill, or of anchovies, or of some amount of food. And so I brought that skill set with me into my PhD. And then most of my projects were then about kind of combining what is the prey doing with what are the predators doing. And so you put a tag on a whale and you can have different projects, we'll have different study species. And then you can look at what that whale does underwater in relation to the prey. And so I did that work in a lot of different places. We worked in Monterey Bay. We worked on blue whales and humpback whales in Monterey Bay, where we were based. And that was great field work. But we also got to do projects on minke whales and humpback whales in the Antarctic. And we did a project on supergroups, big aggregations of humpback whales, up to 150 animals or 200 animals in the space of about 100 meters by 100 meters.
Wow.
Wow.
Off the coast of South Africa.
Okay.
And so we worked with people at the Department of the Environment there, and that was really cool.
Can you
Is it
imagine?
scary to be around that many whales at once?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. Sure, whales are unpredictable. They're big, and they have humpbacks have really powerful flukes, and you don't want to startle them. You need to work with boat drivers you trust, like the people who like the tagger. I'm often the person like on the back. My background here, I'm the tagger. It's just one of my roles that I've played. So you're standing on the front of the boat with the pole, and you try to get within 6 meters. You have a 6 meter pole, so you got to get within 6 meters of the animal, and you get the tag on there. But really, the tagger is just the muscle. The driver is really the skill position here, to like someone who can really nose animals and knows how to like get to read the animal, so you know when they're going to come up, get you to the right distance away, and be safe. Do that all in kind of a safe manner, and know when to go for it and when to kind of back off and let the animal be at peace. It's I've been lucky to work with some really great boat drivers.
Can't imagine getting up and tagging those blue whales.
It's pretty special. Blue whales are amazing. If you've ever seen a blue whale, you know that like it's just seen like it kind of surfaces and then goes and then goes and then goes and goes and goes and goes. And finally maybe you see the tail, and it just kind of feels like it takes forever because you see most of that animal exposed at the surface as it rolls, and it's just kind of and it's cool. And and if it's a clear day with the sun's coming in and you can kind of see that glow underwater, that nice blue glow, and it's pretty special. So I feel really lucky to have been close to them.
About how many feet away do you guys get the boat? Because how long is that pole actually?
The pole is 6 meters, so it's about 20 feet long.
Okay.
And that's how far away you get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much control do you have when it's like all the way extended? Because like you kind of have some finesse, right? You want it in a specific place on the whale.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, one of the tags we put on is a Ecg tag, a heart rate tag that can measure. It has 2 little electrodes in the suction cups, embedded in the suction cups, and we're out on the boat on the Musculus. Out there is the name of the boat, and I'm out there with James, who's my driver, and Paul Ponganis, who is a anesthesiologist. He's a full-time anesthesiologist down at UC San Diego, and but he retired, and now he just like works on marine mammals almost like full-time. And so we're trying to get this Ecg tag on there, and Paul says like, okay, Dave, just get that tag on the whale above wherever the heart is. And so you have to a little bit of control. That the answer to your question is like, oh, how much control do you have? And you're trying, and you have a vision of where you want the tag to go, but it doesn't always work that way. Like the animal moves differently, or your boat's moving and you're bouncing around. And so a lot of what we do quantitatively is you get the tag on there and it's sticking onto the animal, but you're trying to get the camera facing forward, or you're trying to get the heart rate over the right spot, but that tag might not be facing in the perfect orientation. It might be facing down or backwards or whatever. So a lot of what we do is a quantitative then mathematical changing of the axes, so that you can align the way that the tag is facing with the way that the whale is facing. And then you can actually measure things like the animal's orientation, its pitch, and its roll, and its direction in space. But you have to orient the tag mathematically first.
So it's like a post-processing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you out recently? Like 3 weeks now, I think it's been since we had the blue whales. Did you get out there on the water?
No, we haven't. We've been itching to. We heard that there's some out there this spring, but we haven't gotten a field season together yet.
Yeah, they kind of pushed out. I think they're not here right now. But there was some research boat headed out there that one day. Remember?
Yeah, I don't know whose it is. I mean, it was a red Zodiac with the bow pulpit on it.
Yeah, they're all red.
I mean, I've even seen Oregon State trailer it down there, and I've seen Barb Lobberquist out there, and I'm like, wait, what are you doing here? So I don't know whose boat it was, but it was a red Zodiac.
Cool. Could have been the Moss Landing rib too. They have a
yeah.
Actually, that might have been who it was. Do you have a favorite whale that you like to tag, or an easier whale like the humpback versus blue?
Yeah, good question. It's hard not to love a blue whale for all of the reasons. But even specifically for research, one of the things about blue whales is that they're so extreme, right? They're the biggest animal of all time. And one of the things that means is that their behaviors start to get a little simpler. And so versus a humpback whale can feed on fish, or it can feed on different kinds of fish. It can use bubble net feeding. It can feed on the bottom. It can feed on krill. And so to study humpback whales means a lot of different varieties of behaviors that you have to kind of parse. You need a lot of data to really work with humpback whales. Versus a blue whale, if it's really stereotyped behavior and it's diving to depth, feeding a bunch of times, coming back up, it allows you to kind of draw conclusions more readily and more easily about the kinds of trade-offs that are involved with holding its breath to depth. And you can kind of gauge better what it's doing. So I like working with blue whales, and they're amazing to kind of see and work with. Humpback whales are great. They're gregarious. They're like fun to be around, but they can be a little bit more difficult to study for that. But the other animals I really love working with too are in the Antarctic. We got to work with minke whales, and we went to. There are minke whales in a lot of different oceans, and there are different species than the ones in the Antarctic. There's the common minke whales up here versus the Antarctic minke whales. And but the Antarctic ones are a little easier to tag because they can sometimes live in kind of not live in, but you'll be found in groups of 5 or 7 animals. And then when they're doing that, they're in this social dynamic that's a little bit more distracted. So you can kind of maneuver your boat up on them without really bothering them, and more likely get a tag on. And they're feeding on krill, just like a blue whale does, versus minke whales up here might feed on fish, have a little bit more complicated behavior. In the Antarctic, they're feeding on krill. And you can then do those comparisons. Like how does a minke whale feed versus how does a blue whale feed? They're feeding on the same animals. They're feeding on krill, and they're feeding on these krill swarms in the same way, using this lunge feeding strategy. But what are the differences? Like why do you have this extreme size range? Why can't you be a minke whale? Why can't you be smaller than a minke whale? Why is a minke whale the smallest kind of lunge filter feeder? Why can't you have something smaller than that?
True.
So those are kind of the questions that I'm working on right now, right before I got on this call.
Awesome.
Well,
Man,
let us know.
I couldn't imagine trying to tag a minke whale here. It's just so erratic.
Oh
and
yeah,
I don't think
it.
I've
Oh,
ever
right.
seen a group of more than like 3, and I
I've
can't
never
imagine
seen a
that
group
would
of
be
them.
weird.
I think that'd be so cool.
Yeah, that would be super cool.
Yeah.
Which type of whale does the tag stay on the longest? Because like humpbacks, I feel like work against you sometimes to get them off.
Yeah, they. I was just looking through our krill feeding humpback data recently, and I was surprised that we actually had 0 tags, that's suction cup tags that stayed on humpback whales overnight. They stayed on maybe until 10 or 11 p.m., but nothing that stayed on overnight until the next day. And I didn't really realize that. We had some fish feeders stay on for a couple of days, but none of the krill feeders. And so made some of my analysis challenging. But in the Antarctic, actually, we've had tags stay on humpback whales for a week.
Wow.
Part of the reason for that is that they have in the cold water, the animals don't shed their skin. The whales don't shed their skin. They kind of like hold on to it because it takes so much energy to regenerate that skin layer in really cold water. And so that's why, like, I don't know if you've seen that killer whales in the Antarctic, they'll have that like yellow film on them, and then they'll migrate up to warmer waters and shed their skin and then come back. And then they'll be kind of fresh again, and then they'll get that yellow film of diatoms on there, build that up slowly over time. So one way you can kind of tell, like a minke whale down there, whether it's been overwintered in the Antarctic or not, is whether or not it has that yellow film on it, whether it has that diatom film, or whether it's gone up north and shed its skin. And so because of that, these animals often have really glassy, really smooth skin, and suction cup tags will just stay on there for a long time. And so we'll actually use like releases to get the tags back before the whale migrates.
Wow.
It just stays on it for life.
I had no idea.
Yeah, because I always thought the most they'd stay on is like 72 hours.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's typical. Around here, we've never had one longer than 72 hours. But in colder places, they can stay on for longer.
You said that the krill lunge feeder, the humpbacks lunge feeding on krill, stayed on less time than the fish.
Yeah, and I don't know why that is.
Why?
Like, fish feeders are really more dynamic. It could just be random chance, like the whales that we happen to tag.
Huh.
Interesting. That's so cool.
Yeah, one of the things about studying whales is we're still kind of dealing with small sample sizes a lot, so sometimes it's hard to separate out like the random effects.
Yeah, when I took a marine mammal biology class, it was like the teacher was like, "We are a statistician's worst nightmare. Our sample size is 3, and we're happy that we got 3."
Yeah.
So, do you have some projects that you've worked on over the years that are like your favorite, that like really stand out for you, either the field work or what you learned about the animal or anything like that?
Yeah, my favorite data ones, I'll start there, are looking at when we can actually measure prey right next to a foraging whale. So if we have a echo sounder, a scientific echo sounder that can measure the prey concentration on a small boat, we can kind of lower that echo sounder off the small boat and kind of follow the animal as close as we can to try to measure what is that prey concentration right where that animal is foraging, and compare that to the bigger environment. Now that takes a lot of data and it's hard to do. So we're still like, that's a future paper still. We're still kind of collecting that data part. But if you ever see me out there, that's probably what I'm trying to collect data for. That's my big passion, is to kind of narrow down the distribution of kinds of food that these animals get and how often they're actually feeding and how much they're actually kind of intake and working on. But favorite projects in the field, I love anything with good people. You know, anything that you have a good group of people who have a mix of experience levels and who are trying to, you have new people who are trying to learn the ropes, and experienced people who know what they're doing, and it's fun to kind of have everyone working together for common goals. So it's the best ones are the ones where we can kind of all be on a big boat for a while and launch small boats off of it. We used to do this Southern California project, the behavior response study project, where we would rent a diving boat and go out to the Channel Islands, and we would have our small ribs, our rigid hull inflatables that have the bow pulpits on them to actually do the tagging. We would kind of tow those behind the big boat or drive with those on the big boat, but then we'd all sleep on the big boat at night, and then we'd go out on the small boats to go on various adventures, and we'd run drones or some of the sonar sources off of the big boat. These were behavioral response studies. So basically, we were looking for the they're funded by the Navy to look at the effect of things like naval sonar on animals, to kind of look at when and where should we restrict sonar use based on habitat use. And so we would play these naval sonar sounds back to these animals and then look at their responses.
Wow.
So that was a neat, like, kind of direct applicable project to work on. It has, like, some of what I do is like a lot of basic science. Like, I like to understand, what are these whales doing? Where are they feeding? Why are they so big? Why aren't they bigger? Why aren't they smaller?
Yeah.
And so we can kind of have a big understanding of how these animals work biologically, but the ones that have like a direct conservation application are also very interesting.
Do you have a direct conservation aspect or a project that's related to conservation that pops to mind, whether it be sonar or maybe ship strike or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I like the one I just described, that behavioral response study is one we're still kind of actively involved in. Like, how do whales respond to sonar? I'm looking at right now. My project for the summer is to look at for these experiments that we did, both our group and then a 3S group in the Atlantic with some European colleagues, with which we looked at more Adonisines, beaked whales, and bottlenose whales.
Oh yeah.
And looked at the effect of sonar on those guys. One of the things I'm trying to do is quantify the energetic use during previous to the exposure and then during the exposure, and look for any kind of less obvious effects on these animals compared to the sonar periods. So that's one I'm working on. And then the other thing is just the other kind of conservation application is just really looking at the foraging style of these animals. Where do they feed? One of the things we're looking at is the depth at which they feed compared to the bottom in Monterey Bay. And so you could look at, like, well, what are your likelihood of interacting with fishing gear that's on the bottom, and what can we do about that?
Awesome.
There's this new paper that came out recently that we've been talking about, one that says that we've been underestimating the amount that whales have typically eaten. We think that maybe they could eat up to 20,000 pounds of food in a day, right? A blue whale. Do you think research is showing that, like, as populations of whales continue to grow, that there might be a certain carrying capacity with the state of our oceans today, with overfishing, with our populations? Do you think is there any data that shows or talks about that?
Well, I mean, all animals will have some carrying capacity, right? Some ability that the environment can support. I think your question is kind of, is that number lower than it used to be?
Yeah.
And probably, although I that's just an intuition. It's hard to know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's hard because we don't have data, right? Like, one of the things that's hard,
Back
one of
in
the
the
things that's
day.
wild about studying whales is we have this opportunity where whales are coming back, and we finally can, like, study, like, what happens as the population increases, and how do they discover new niches, and how do they exploit new areas, and how do they deal with add a carrying capacity versus a low population level. And so that's a neat time to study, but we don't have a lot of background knowledge.
Yeah.
Like, we kind of search through the old, Moby Dick type stories to, like, look at what did whales used to be like, and it's hard to kind of compare quantitatively, like, well, how many whales were there historically? So there are best estimates, and we can kind of look at those, but we'll see. I mean, like, blue whales have had a hard time coming back,
exactly.
right? They're still low numbers, but things like humpback whales have come back probably to pre-whaling numbers. So that's pretty cool.
I guess that's always my question is with blue whales, is that, they seem to be right at that 2,000 mark. And I just always want to know, like, are they ever going to get past that? Like, is it because krill is being spread out up and down the coast? Like, because here in Santa Barbara, I mean, typically is a really nice blue whale hotspot. And for the last couple of years, it's been extremely hit or miss. There's either 50 of them here or there's 0. So I always blue whales always intrigue me, at least their population in terms of is it going to grow? Is it just going to stay here forever? Is that a carrying
Yeah.
capacity deal? Is it a ship strike issue? I just always go back to that. So
We have the same question in Monterey. When it's a hot blue whale year in Monterey, is it because it's really good in Monterey, or is it because it's really bad elsewhere? And Monterey is kind of
Mhm.
Yeah.
bad.
Mhm.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I usually ask the question kind of like in reverse. I'm like, is it so good here that this is the place to be and it's not good anywhere else? That's what I usually ask myself on the boat when I see a whole bunch of whales. I'm like, is this the only place to be? If so, that may not be the best thing.
It's the only place, and there's only 10 blue whales. It's not good.
Yeah.
No, there was probably more than that a couple weeks ago, further
Yeah.
out too.
I think if you went further up those canyons up towards Davenport, there would have
Yeah.
been even more, but we just were around like the Soquel Canyon area.
Well, that's the other thing. It's like our view of whales along the west coast is whatever within 30 miles of the coast. I mean, who knows what's out there at the Davidson Seamount or other mounts super far offshore. I think we have a very small sample size. Again, I guess that's what it all comes back to, is having a small sample size. But
Yeah.
One of the other conservation questions we're kind of starting to ask is about is that like where the idea of hotspots, right? Like these animals find places where the krill's really good for some defined period of time, and that can be a day where like the krill kind of cycles through based on currents, or it can be kind of a season. And so, what's the dynamic? What's the duration of some of these hotspots, and how important are they? Like California's done a good job of defining marine protected areas all up and down the coast, right? And those are places where there are no take zones, or places that have some level of protection. But the important areas also kind of move up and down the coast as things like krill and anchovies move through the ocean. And so can we have more of there's a concept of dynamic ocean management. Can we make more real-time decisions based on where the big predators are and where prey concentrations are, and decide, okay, this year for this week, we have to protect this area because this is a critical thing. And as we start thinking about like, offshore wind energy development and those kind of questions, can we kind of have a better sense of where those important areas are?
Yeah, we talked to John Kalamokidis a while ago about the channel here and the ship strike issue, and it's like he was saying that creating a dynamic change in the ship strike or in the shipping lanes is actually worse for the shipping companies. They want a strict, either you can go this speed during this time or you can't. And recently with the lack of blue whales, it's like, is it really even worth it at this point? Like, is it okay to have those different times of faster speeds for the vessels when the blue whales aren't here? Because for the past couple of years they have or haven't been here. But it's just interesting. I think that's obviously the way to go, is to have a dynamic change of rules and a dynamic ocean conservation agenda. But I guess that doesn't work for a lot of people. So
it would be cool if we could change like rules on the fly for that kind of stuff. Like just recently, this past week in Monterey, there's been over 100 humpback whales in the bay, and then more closely to like right in front of Moss Landing, within a quarter mile, there's been 20 to 50 humpback whales, like all within 1 mile of the harbor entrance. So you got hundreds of recreational and commercial salmon boats like just zooming out of the harbor. And I mean, it's mind blowing that they have not hit a whale. Like there'll be 7 whale watch boats, or not 6 or 5 or 6 whale watch boats, all stopped in one spot and then just zipping right through them. And it's like, oh, it's so scary. And it's like, how do you put like, honestly, all they would have to do is just put like a 5-mile-an-hour zone between the harbor until like 1 mile out for that one, week, right? But how do you even tell all the boaters that kind of thing? So it's where we're at with that too.
Yeah, we need to do a better job of aggregating that data. Like you guys are out there every day, and we need to do a better job of like getting, aggregating that sightings data so we can kind of use that as a source.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the direction like the crab fishery's been shifting, is more of like they make heat maps of like where the gear and where the whales are, and like to try and reduce entanglements, they're sort of taking that approach, and it seems a little better. I don't know if we can prove how much better it is yet, but seems to be less whales reported entangled from my personal experience. But I have a question about how you fund your work. I'm assuming that a lot of it's grants and it's like constantly just looking for money type of thing. How does it work to fund research like what you're doing?
Yeah. If you're a listener at home, I do take personal checks.
Yeah, seriously.
Me too.
We'll take a percentage of
but
that.
we do rely on a lot of donations. We do rely on donations. We do a kind of a mix of a lot of different sources. We don't have one funding source for things. We do some government funded grants, National Science Foundation grants, or Office of Naval Research grants. The behavioral response study I was talking about was funded by the Office of Naval Research, and they'll fund both the actual field work, but also even they'll fund some of the analysis. They'll fund a postdoc time or salary or a student salary or the principal investigator salary to actually do this analysis and coordinate this work and actually make things happen. So there are some government grants for those kind of projects. And then some of it there are internal funds sometimes from universities to do some of this work. And then we rely on other foundational grants. Like there are groups like the American Cetacean Society will offer small grants to help fund some of our work. A lot of it, they do a lot of good work for students, so students can start doing projects down that way. And then we do rely on donations both from individuals. So we have the California Ocean Alliance is our kind of nonprofit group that both runs things like outreach programs for high school kids, but then also will accept donations to help do research. And then we have, and then we also do work with companies that want to do in-kind research. So we do a lot of to work in the Antarctic, for instance. A lot of the work we do in the Antarctic with Ari Friedlander's lab is based on collaborations with cruise ship companies. So they'll offer us transit down there, so that all of our kind of transit needs are taken care of, and even sometimes give us a boat to do research off of, like a small Zodiac to do research off of. And then in kind, we talk to the passengers and show them what we're doing and give a talk to the passengers. And so cool. They will support our research in those ways. So we have to be kind of clever and creative to do a lot of this different research.
I mean, I've seen you guys get the mic handed to you even when you're tagging in Monterey Bay.
Yeah.
Whale watch boat. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I have. I've seen that a couple times actually.
Actually, that's a good point that you brought up the California Ocean Alliance. Can you talk a little bit more about that organization? I've always been a little bit curious about it.
Yeah, I mean, just that. It's just as a group of us locally who decided who wanted to have a kind of a separate arm from the academic realm to do more collaborative projects. So we can it's just a logistical thing, to be honest, in a lot of ways. It's a way to kind of synthesize a lot of the work that we do and have a specific mission of both education and research, and be able to kind of fund some different projects that way.
That's cool. That's a good idea to kind of like pool your resources so that it's a little easier.
Yeah. And it's something, we change affiliations a lot. Like I've bounced around between universities and I've bounced around, we often change positions, but if you have kind of one home that you can work with and say like, okay, well, we're still going to run this grant through California Ocean Alliance, and that can make it a little easier.
Yeah. Nice. So I mean, I've asked you this question before, more specifically about Monterey Bay, but I would expand it to maybe the ocean in general doing your work. Do you have like a favorite encounter or memory from doing field work with, it could be with any wildlife, I suppose, but like one day that stands out to you?
Yeah, I've got, I can say two, and they're not going to surprise you. They're the times when the whales take an interest in you. And like that's a really powerful moment when you're just out on a boat and a whale comes up to you. And it's, I've had a friendly humpback encounters. Once it's John Kalmakidis, 6 miles off the west coast of an unpopulated island off the Channel Island. And we were kind of waiting. Our partner boats were stuck in bad weather, and somehow where we were was in the lee of the island in really nice weather. And we saw one humpback whale, and we took a biopsy sample to get a sense, get its hormone levels and things like that. And then the whale just kind of came up to us and just checked us out for over an hour and just was waving its peck fluke around, and just kind of coming up to the boat. And it was really neat. We were just waiting around for it, and it just checked us out. And then in the Antarctic is another place where I've been lucky to. There's a lot of the Antarctic animals are, they're not used to seeing boats and people. Like it's not as crowded there as it is anywhere else in the world. And so these animals show a degree of curiosity. They're naturally inquisitive, and so they're like, what is this thing that is as big as an iceberg but kind of moves around and has some noise associated with it? And I've had minke whales that we've tagged kind of come back up to us the next day and film us in the boats, because they're just like that curious and just swim around the boat. It's a really good look at it.
You're watching the tag data and it's you on the video. It's right next to you.
That's awesome.
I'll tell you, the first picture a whale took of me is better than the first picture I took of a whale.
Well, the camera's probably improved since then too.
That's awesome.
So if people want to learn more about your work or like how to support your work, where is a good place to send them?
Yeah, great. I would check out the California Ocean Alliance as a place to support. And I have a lot of our research and kind of current projects up on my website. You can go check out all the new recent papers and stuff and davidecade.com, or you can check out you can go to any of the universities, either Jeremy Goldbogen's lab webpage or the Ari Friedlander's webpage at UC Santa Cruz are all good places to go. And then the other place, the great kind of West Coast collaborative place is Cascadia Research Collective. They are based up in Olympia, but they do great work all up and down the coast. And so we post a lot of our videos from our tag videos up there. A lot of the gray whale work we do, we post with them, and they're kind of an overarching organization that we work with a lot to do a lot of the field work. So they're a great place to kind of look at and check out. CascadiaResearchCollective.org.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Wow. Well, this was super fun to chat with you about all this stuff. I love hearing stories about putting tags on whales, but I didn't even know about the basking shark thing. So that was super cool.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Yeah, we really appreciate having you on.
Cool. Well, thanks guys. Yeah. Look forward to hearing all your next adventures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, thank you to everyone that listens to the podcast. We appreciate you all and those of you that support us in every way, shape, and form. And do we want to do a secret whale of the week? Should we let Dave pick a secret whale of the week?
Pick
on
the whale,
Instagram?
Dave.
On
Or
Instagram, they
shark
put
if
it
you
in the
want.
comments. Or it could be a shark. Could be an individual whale. Could be a type of whale.
Gotta go with Vaquita.
Okay.
There you go.
That's a good one.
We haven't talked
good
about them in a while.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
we haven't.
haven't.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us, Dave.
Yeah.
Right on.
Thank you.
Talk to you guys soon.